Hello, lovely people. So glad that you're back. Today, we're going to talk about something that I've alluded to in many episodes. I've talked about in pieces, but it in and of itself is a huge topic when it comes to neurodivergence, and that is change, the acceptance of change, and how it impacts us. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. Let's start with what is change. We've talked about it for schedules. We've talked about it in small ways with feelings and sensitivities and risk. But change is big. Change is almost every change. And I think that's something that a lot of people might not understand. There's a lot of change that other people look forward to that people like me do not. Let's start with that. Change in our bodies. So here we have the thing we are, the thing we're living in, and it changes on us. We have absolutely no control. Puberty is hell. Everything about you changes, and it changes overnight, and you don't have any warning that it's going to happen. You look around and all these people are trying to grow up. So everyone, at least for me anyways, I know that different neurodivergent people are different, but I never wanted to grow up because I looked around and I saw how responsible adults had to be. And I was perfectly happy where I was. But everyone around me was super excited about all the changes that were happening, growing up, their bodies, etc. I was not. I totally did not enjoy any of the things and milestones that women talk about when it comes to growing up. So first, it's the body. The body suddenly starts to change in significant ways. And at least for women, I think for men too, but I'm not a man, so I can't talk to it. It changes constantly throughout our lives. It's, during pregnancy, oh my gosh. And then after pregnancy, and then gaining weight and losing weight and things slowing down. And it's like the changes never stop. And you keep trying to catch up and adjust to them. And by the time you're adjusting to a change, it happens again. So there you go. So the body is like, at least for me, it was like the first betrayal. It was the thing that was, supposed to be mine, but I have absolutely no control. So there's that kind of change. There is broad changes in things around you. As I'm talking right now, it is December 29th, so I'm still in the middle of the holidays, even though you won't be when I actually release this episode. And my maternal grandmother died 3 days ago. The last 4 years of my life have been a ridiculous amount of change. First, there was COVID, which, as I spoke about a little bit in terms of risk, really reduced my risk bubble. But it also changed the way the world worked. It changed everything around me overnight. So that was some adjustment. Then in 2020, my dad passed away because of COVID. And my father was my person. So that was really, really difficult. In 2021, my paternal grandmother, so my dad's mom, and my uncle on her side, and my husband's father all passed away. None of them due to COVID. In 2022, my husband's brother passed away. And one of our best friends also passed away. And in 2023, I was hit with this horrendous migraine, vestibular migraine. I had never heard of it before. That left me with vertigo 100% of the time. I was in bed for almost 6 months. Luckily, I could work from home and I could force myself out of the home for, special meetings with customers and stuff for 8 hours, even though it was really, really hard. And then finally, I got over that towards the end of last year, beginning of this year. And this year, I lost an aunt. I lost one of my online friends who I've known for 25 years, and now my grandmother. And that's a lot of change. That's a lot of change even for a normal person. But think about it. Every single one of those things is a change that was not announced ahead of time, of course, right? And because you don't have time to prepare, the change hits you really hard. And then it lingers. It lingers and lingers and lingers. And it's not necessarily the grieving. It's not necessarily the wrist bubble. I mean, all of those things, right? But it is adjusting to the new state of the world takes forever. I know that at the end of 2023, I definitely felt like I need a month. I need months. I need time off work where I can just process, because there's so much to process, and yet I have to keep going. I think, the masking and this, it's definitely the foundation for autistic burnout. And I look at this and I'm like, everybody grieves. Of course, everybody grieves. And everybody has to deal with disruptive change. But I think it's the bounce back, right? When I go to work after the passing of yet another relative, and I know other people who have taken bereavement leave, and they come back and they seem to bounce right back. I'm sure emotionally and everything, they might still be a mess, but somehow they can compartmentalize and come back to work and just do the work. And I can't. I'm a blurry mess for weeks after. So that's big change. And big change happens all around us all the time. And as you get older, I think you probably get a lot more big changes regularly. Change takes a lot out of us. When we're little, when big change hits us, we throw tantrums. We freak out. We get really, really upset. We go quiet and nonverbal. I'm the type that has a panic attack for a few moments as I try to assimilate the way everything has changed. And I've talked about that before. But I think different people with neurodivergences deal with this change differently. I'm a fairly introverted, reserved person. And so me dealing with change just kind of internalizes, and hey, I try not to cry on the air. Internalizes, and I don't seem to find the time to be able to move on to the next stage and find stable footing. So those are huge changes. And I wanted to bring them up because huge changes, bodily changes, it's all still change, and we all still react to it. And I think if there are parents listening, there may be moments where it seems really odd that your child is having a moment. And perhaps if you look at change in this broad way, you can figure out what actually changed. If it was that, right? Obviously, it can be other things, but maybe you can find the cause in physical changes, in external changes, in existential changes. My whole view was rocked when the Berlin Wall went down. for me, it was like the world had always been a certain way. And suddenly that broke. And it was obviously a really good thing. But even that geographic change, the idea that the world, that the geography of the world could change was mind-blowing for me. Like even the geography of the world wasn't stable. I don't think I thought of it that way at the time, but it definitely was. And change is especially a big thing during the holidays. So let's talk about that. As a Latina, I grew up in a huge family. I'm the eldest of 30 cousins. My mom is one of 7. My dad is one of 5. It's huge. And I was used to the hustle and bustle of family during the holiday season. And I was used to a lot of noise and being at a table and trying to be engaged with a lot of people, which I think a lot of people with autism are not necessarily subjected to. But I grew up in that. It was normal. When we came to the States, holidays started to be a lot more quiet. We were, just the 5 of us, my siblings and my mom and my dad. And I think the change to that small family gathering ended up being fairly good for me. Like, I think I could handle hanging out with the family for long periods of time, that kind of thing, when it was quieter. But then my mom, who's an extreme extrovert, started to get a lot of friends. And so on Christmas, she would take us to 2 or 3 different people's houses. And by Christmas, I mean Christmas Eve. We Latinos tend to celebrate Christmas Eve as our dinner. So on Christmas Eve, we would suddenly go to 2 or 3 different people's houses. And I didn't know where we were going ahead of time. She would just be like, okay, we've got to go. We'd end up at somebody's house. And then like an hour later, we'd have to move to somebody else's house. And it really was a overwhelming thing for me. I know, looking back, that I was very resentful of it. I felt at the time like the 5 of us were not enough. And what was this need to just randomly invite other people? I think as a teenager, that's where my brain went. What I really think was happening is unannounced change. She would just decide we were going somewhere, not have told any of us. And because I didn't have any understanding or expectation of what we were doing, it would completely throw me off. If I was expecting a quiet evening at home with presents, and suddenly we're being transported to people's houses who don't even have kids. So now we're being asked to be super quiet in the background and let the adults do their thing. And Christmas suddenly wasn't really that fun. I think for those of you who have kids like me, one of the first things, it's the same thing as, when the school's going to have a field day or when the schedule's going to change. Let the kids know ahead of time. Let your partner know ahead of time that you've got some plan. Let your family know ahead of time that you've got some plan. Give them a chance to absorb what is going to happen on that day so that they're not caught off guard. Because some of us are not as verbal as I am. And the only way that we can show our displeasure is to behave in ways that are frustrating for parents. The holidays in general are very sensory overload stimulation, right? So you have to take into account the fact that many of us are overwhelmed by sensory information, period. Some of us, like me, mostly when we're stressed. So here we go. We're throwing change at me, which stresses me out. And then suddenly all of these other things become overwhelming. Luckily, I like Christmas music, so that's not a big deal, but other people don't. So if you have lights flashing, a big Christmas tree, you have people, maybe people who are not your close family, maybe extended family who you don't know very much, maybe in-laws who may treat you well, but maybe you're not that close to, and you're constantly being brushed up against or touched or expected to hug people, etc. Okay, that's sensory issues. If you've got Christmas music playing and everyone's talking, that's overloaded, right? There's a lot of noise going on. And then you have all of these things going on at once. Lots of people you don't see regularly, brushing up against you, lights everywhere, music playing, people talking and chattering. That is a recipe for complete and utter sensory overload. It is exactly the sort of situation that I used to experience when I walked into clubs and I had to leave 10 minutes into walking into a club. I just couldn't even handle it. Holidays can also be isolating. There are things that all of these people enjoy that you don't. Everyone around you seems to be having a great time and you're not. That feels uncomfortable. It feels bad. I know that after we used to go to all of these people's houses, I would end up going and trying to hide with my book in bed. I didn't particularly want to be out with these people. I didn't particularly want to be anywhere else. And once again, I was overstimulated. So books and bed. And that was it. So change. Let's go back to change. So holidays are huge changes in schedules, huge changes in everything, from the way you eat and, being forced to eat traditional things that maybe you don't like, to the people you see, to when you wake up and when you go to sleep. It's all so much. I feel like I have a little bit more of a tolerance for it than a lot of others. But, eldest has a really hard time sitting at the Thanksgiving table sometimes. As he's gotten older, he kind of forces himself to, but when he was younger, I would have to take him a plate up to his room. And I had to be okay with that because it was a lot. It was a lot of people. We have the same people to Thanksgiving every year pretty much. And if we don't, he knows way ahead of time that we're going somewhere, but it's still a lot. So we've talked about body. We've talked about large changes like COVID and stuff. And we've talked about changes because of seasonal things that change your schedule. There are other changes as well. Some of them we deal with easily, smaller things. Some of them we deal with not so easily, and it's very personal which ones are which. I've talked about what happens when there's a change of direction when I've already committed to something. That may not cause an issue for somebody else, but it is one of my big ones. On the other hand, if I change what dinner is going to be tonight, if I change dinner or lunch by an hour or half hour, I do get a little bit stressed, but it's not enough to cause me real difficulties. So I think everybody probably has a different tolerance for different kinds of change. But I think that the holidays as a whole are difficult for people with neurodivergences. And I think that others around us need to be aware and keep in mind the situations and try to plan ahead. I mean, especially if you're dealing with children, right? Try to plan ahead and make sure that you communicate with the child, with your friend, with your lover who is neurodivergent, what plans you have in mind, way ahead of time so that there's chance to adapt to them. There's a chance to speak up about them if something about it might be a trigger or cause an issue, so that you can make sure that everything's planned ahead of time. For instance, Eldest is going to get so upset at me that I keep bringing him up in here, but it helps to illustrate the point. Eldest cannot stand turkey. He will not eat turkey in Thanksgiving. What he needs in Thanksgiving is his ham, some good mashed potatoes, and then he might try a couple of other things. So when he has this like solid base, he sometimes gets adventurous and tries other things. So no matter where we go, if I say I am going to so-and-so's house for Thanksgiving, I have to make sure that I contact so-and-so way ahead of time and say, okay, we're going to your house for Thanksgiving, but we need to have ham. And unfortunately, you know what? It might come across as rude. It might come across to neurotypical people as, wow, you really spoil your son, etc., etc. But it's not. It's the things in Thanksgiving that allow him to feel stable even when we go somewhere else. And they're fairly small things. So if somebody doesn't pay attention to me, I always make sure that wherever we're going, we go a day or two in advance. And if it's clear there's not going to be the ham or the mashed potatoes or whatever, I'll go to the store and I'll get the ham and mashed potatoes, and I don't care how rude it comes off. I don't. And I will cook them. Because as long as that exists, my son will manage to stay fairly stable throughout a very chaotic period and a very odd schedule. He might retreat a little bit into himself, but he's not going to have a large reaction to change because the things that anchor him traditionally to that holiday still exist. And he probably would have something to say about this. But that's how I've always seen it, and my perception seems to have worked. So I'm sure I'll hear about it. Either way, this is all good to know information for even outside the holidays. The holidays are extreme versions of this, right? But if you're going for a long 3-day weekend, make sure that everyone knows what to expect. If there's something that you usually do on that 3-day weekend that is now going to be missing, have a conversation about what other points of stability you can find for that person. If you're going to a very far away place, this summer we took a cruise. So I always thought, this is a non sequitur a little bit, but it does lead into things. I always thought that I didn't have a special interest very much. Like when I was little, it was all mermaids. But supposedly autistics have special interests, right? I have realized that my special interest is all about going somewhere else. I will research the hell out of going somewhere else. I'll get myself really excited. I'll want to go. I don't know if it's because I moved around so much as a kid. There's a lot less stress. So once again, unlike other people who have autism, for me, the solidity of a schedule feels entrapping. So I don't know if maybe it's, oh, wow, this is something that is not normal. So therefore, there are no expectations. So therefore, maybe I can enjoy myself more. I don't know. But my special interest definitely sits on the travel, look at like different places to live, research different countries type of thing. So this summer we went on this giant vacation. It was the graduation of youngest. It was my 50th this year, which just passed a few weeks ago. It was my 15th anniversary with my husband. So it was, it was a lot. So we decided to give the whole family one last big hurrah. We went off to Barcelona and then took a Disney cruise to Italy, and everyone loved it, including eldest. Eldest actually had a great time. But we sat and we talked about what we were going to do ahead of time. We talked over the tours. I made sure that everyone knew what tours we were thinking about and that everyone had somewhat of a say and that they could veto things that sounded overwhelming for them. I made sure that the details of what we were thinking of doing every day was known. And I made sure that there was flexibility so that the special interests of my children could also shine in the middle of that. Well, my children and my youngest fiance. So, for instance, my youngest fiance told us that she loved transportation systems when she got there. So we spent a whole day enjoying trying to learn how to use the trains and going to interesting locations within the city. Eldest wanted to go to the outdoor markets. Like, he loves outdoor markets. So we found St. Anthony's Market in Barcelona and we went there and we walked around, and it was crowded. And he did get a little overwhelmed, but he lasted for a while and he enjoyed it while he could. So I tried. So it's this weird combination that you kind of have to do of scheduling enough so that everyone knows what to expect, but not scheduling so much that if somebody wants to do something special, they don't have the flexibility to do it, because the schedule for those of us who are autistic, as you know, are mostly set in stone. Once you have a schedule, it is really hard to move around it. So you have to figure out this amazing balance of, okay, here are the things that are not going to change. They are going to be our grounding points. We are going to do these things. And here are the things that are open, because that way you and your opinions, and when I say you and your opinions, I mean, the other people involved in whatever trip we're taking, matter. And we can make decisions about going to things that will make you enjoy your trip the most. I don't know if that's how normal people plan their trips. I have no idea. But that's how I have to do it in order to make sure that change during the trip does not overwhelm anybody. So it's all communication. I had to learn to communicate so much with my children. I used to not communicate very well at all unless I was upset. And that's coming from my dad's family a little bit. And I had to learn how to verbalize everything to make sure that my children understood what was going on in my head. So by the same token, I learned how to communicate the schedules, what I was thinking of doing, where we were going on a trip, asking, people to do research so that I would get things that they wanted to do, make sure we got to those. I think I'm repeating myself at this point, so I will stop. The point is, sometimes those grounding things make it easier to deal with a bigger change in schedule or a bigger change in even just location. It might not even be scheduled. We may be having Thanksgiving at the same time, but we're in a different place. So I hope you all had great holidays. I hope you managed to work through them. And if you didn't, that's okay. Holidays are not for everybody. Not everybody celebrates these holidays. I know I keep saying the holidays, and then I'm like, wait, there are people who don't celebrate these particular holidays, and I'm not including them. But I think every religion has some holiday that's bright and loud and beautiful, like Diwali. And those are the days where somebody who doesn't deal well with change will probably have the hardest time. And I always say that's okay. I'm having a hard time figuring out how to make that make sense for this time. And for those of you who are the ones for whom change is difficult, you're not alone. We all struggle with it. And there's a whole community of different people out there who can support you and help you verbalize what you need. So I hope that after the December season, you are all still doing okay. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda, and this podcast is part of Labrat Solutions, Inc.